This is Pat Torman. Today we're going to be looking at smart clients, data sets, and in particular connection strings. Connection strings by themselves would be fairly easy, so we're going to go after the hard one, which is configuring connection strings at runtime. This gets to be a bit of a problem because connection strings by default are read-only in Visual Studio 2005. So let's take a look. This came across my desk because somebody sent me this link right here, and I'll include that link for you to check out, and we'll just click on it. And you'll see this is a link to the Msdn data site. I believe it's Steve Lasker's site. And they suggest that you go after this particular property called settings loaded, particular method event, I should say. Anyway, we're not going to do that, but it gave me a really good idea. So let's take a look at something here. First, we're going to need a connection string to play with. So I've connected up Northwind, our old buddy there, and we made a quick data set to Northwind. Now, when you create a data set, as I did here by just saying data, add new data source, what you get is a reference, in this case, a SQL Express file, and there's the data set itself represented in locally as an XSD document. Now, this has embedded in it the connection string. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do this kind of clever stuff. For example, preview the data, which is to say that this information is being stored locally. Now, where it gets the data from is connection, and I'll expand that a little bit for you. And it says connection string from my settings. Okay, so let's go look where that is. I'll go into Solution Explorer, My Project, and go to Settings. And as you can see, there it is. And you've probably seen this a million times. But the point of it is that its scope is application-wide, which is to say that you cannot edit this connection string at runtime. And of course, most of the time you wouldn't want to do that because you want your data connection already resolved by the time the application opens up. But suppose I had, I don't know, new connection string. And I wanted to make it of type string. I could leave that user defined, and in this case I'll just copy and paste this one right in there. If it's user defined, then that means it's scoped so that the user can change it. Okay, hold that thought. We cannot change the connection string because its type is connection string and its scope is application. If it was just a string, I can change it if I need to at runtime. So I'm going to go to my form in design mode, and I'm going to drop a button on my form. And I'll just leave it as is, but we'll go over here and put some code behind the click event. I can find out what that is by saying my.settings.connection string. Alright, now that's not a problem. I can see what it is because it's strongly typed. But if you try to reverse that and say my.settings equals something else, you immediately get an error from this because the connection string is read-only. So, how do we change the connection string? Well, this is where things get a little bit tricky. First of all, you'd want to change the connection string someplace before you load any data. I need to stress the importance of that because you don't want your data connecting to one source and then switching to another midstream. So that'll be your responsibility. I'm going to show you how to actually use it. Okay, let's just comment this out so it doesn't get me into any trouble. Now I'm going to go back to my start page, my Solution Explorer, and My Project. Now to see how you get this, and this is a bit tricky, I didn't even know this event was here until I read this article, so let's take a look at what it says. It says to add an event handler, double-click on My Project in the Solution Explorer, and click the Setting tabs on the left-hand side. Then, View Code. Let's show you where that is. I'm going to go to Settings. I'm looking at my settings value here, and I'm going to hit just F7 to view the code. And there you have it. You have some properties you can play with. My setting events, settings loaded. All right, this looks like a great start. We're not actually going to use this because it turns out that, while it may be convenient for a whole lot of applications, it fires when the application first comes up. That's when the settings are loaded. I want to be able to change it after I've collected some data from my end user. The end user is going to provide some information, and I'd like to force that back into the settings. Hold that thought. Even here, of course, I can't just say my.settings dot connection string equals ABC, because it's still not available at runtime. So what do we need to do to solve that problem? Well, here's a technique that I've been using, and it seems to be pretty successful. It turns out that this strongly typed thing is entirely related to the problem that is strongly typed. And you can get around that, and I'm getting this from the article, and you can completely get around this strongly typed argument by referring to it as late bound me.item connection string equals, and then whatever your connection string happens to be. Now it's very important that this is exactly the same thing as in my project settings. And the reason for that is because item is not strongly typed. Which is to say that when my settings loaded, if I wanted to, I could assign that right now. Well, that's not exactly what I'm looking for. So what I need to do here, we'll just cut and paste that. And I can delete that since you've seen that it's strongly typed. And come up here and just create a new way to assign that. And I'm going to make it a property. And so I'm going to add a property and make it a public read-only property. Public write-only property. Write-only because I am going to just write it to the connection string. Okay, now anytime I pass in the value, it's going to set my connection string without using the strongly typed reference. And because it's a property, it should show up in IntelliSense. So where will I do that? Well, I had my form button here, and that's where I was originally playing with it. Let's go take a look at that now. Okay, that allows me to assign the connection string at runtime. We know we can change the connection string at runtime. We've got to figure out how we can use that to make us better programmers. So the way we're going to do it is a little demo how you might do it in an actual application. I'm just going to add a Windows form to this application. Form 1 is a great name, so I'll keep that one. And we'll make my form a little bit larger so you can see it. In my project, I have my connection string, and the connection string connects up to a local SQL database, and run that connection, and he's a good one. And I've also added a production connection string, and my production connection string goes over to the Silver server. I name my machines by various colors: blue, red, green, and silver. And I'm going to use SQL authentication for the login. We'll test that connection, and that succeeded. Click OK. Go back to my form, and I can view my data sources. And I'll just drag the Northwind customers table onto my form. Now, if you haven't seen this before, this wizard is a pretty good one. He just jumps out there and creates an instance of the Northwind dataset, a customer's binding source, a customer's table, and the customer's binding navigator, which is this device right up here. I'm going to jump onto the grid for a minute and take a couple of columns away we don't need, just to neaten it up a little bit. And then I'm going to go over to my toolbar and add a text box. Now I'm going to do with the text box is give us a place to show what the actual connection string is at runtime. We'll take a look at behind the scenes here. And in particular, I want to look at the form load event. And you can see what the wizard did for me is he just filled the customer's table adapter. And as you can see, the wizard created and filled the table adapter with the Northwind dataset customers table. Now what I'll do is show you how we can make that show up. And in my text box, I'm just going to get that connection string and stick it in the text box for you so you can see it at runtime. Now connection strings can get a bit lengthy, so I'll make sure this is long enough so you can see it. And no surprise there is my data, and it's running off the SQL Express as an attached database. Go to my form for a second, make sure it opens in the center screen, just to make it a little bit easier to see next time. And I'll go back to the data. Now the next thing I need to see is if I want to change the table adapter's connection string, all I have to do is one line of code. So what I'm saying here is I want to use my production connection string settings and drop it into the my settings runtime connection string. Remember, that's the method, the property I overwrote, that just assigns it back to the connection string value. Okay, want to run it this time, what do you get? As you can see, it's an entirely different database, not a particularly pleasant looking one. And here's my connection string. Again, it's going to the SQL Server, and it's using the login ID, and there's the mysterious password. You wouldn't do this in production. So another technique you might want to put to use here, another thing you might like to do here, and I use this all the time myself, is to put it, encase it in a compiler constant. So in this case, it's going to be if it should be if not debug then and if. Now what this will do for me is only when the application is compiled in debug will it run the standard, the local configuration, and otherwise it's going to run the production configuration string. We'll run that real quick for you and so you can see it. I'm using my SQL Express. Go to Configuration Manager and set it into release mode. And we'll do a full build of it. And we'll just drop this out of the way, run over to the release directory, and run the application. This time you can see I'm going to the Silver server because I'm actually using the production mode because of the compiler directive if debug. Okay, this is Pat Tormey, and you've been looking at how to set connection strings dynamically at runtime.